Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Beyond the Box Score. Crazy, we're already 26 episodes down now, but what a year of sports it has been so far, and that includes the last calendar year. And one of these sports, college basketball, came to its recent end with Michigan defeating UConn and taking the national championship for this season. And congratulations to you as well, because in our big group, I don't want to say community, but our big group bracket that we did with a bunch of friends, you tied for first with a friend of mine back home. So congratulations to you. Arizona unfortunately could not get it done for me, but we're not here to talk about Arizona. We're here to talk about the national championship game, Michigan, and I guess overall the overall culminating season that they had, because it is truly one of the most dominant seasons in college basketball history, and it would be relished in that same way even more had they defeated Duke early in the season. So I want to get your thoughts on that game, Michigan as a team as well, and the fact that they've already shuffled some pieces and they're already getting ready to add guys in the portal as they look to bounce back.
Yeah, I think everybody really caught Michigan caught everybody's attention when they blew out Gonzaga out in Maui by 40. It was like 101 to 60 or whatever that game was. I mean, it was crazy. I was a big fan of Yaxel Lendeborg when he was at UAB last year, so I thought him going to Michigan was a huge addition for them. Little did I know that they would have this good of a team around him. Dusty May is one of the premier coaches in the sport, absolutely no doubt about it. And it's just one of the most dominant runs that we've seen in quite some time. I mean, they had 90 points every game of the tournament up until the championship. But I think what's really most impressive is that UConn played the game the way they wanted to in the championship. They slowed it down. It got into a half court offense. They did not want Michigan to just run and gun on them because it would have been a repeat of the Arizona game. Arizona gave zero resistance. So I was impressed with the way that UConn played, but I think this just goes to show how good Michigan is, how balanced they were. And they were able to play any pace they wanted, any style they wanted, as you saw. They could run up and down the floor with Arizona. They could run up and down the floor with Howard in the first round, as you saw. And then they can slow down and they could still beat you like UConn did. I know the ending was potentially a little controversial, but still, I mean, they were, what, 0 for 8 from 3 in the first half, and they were still up 4. You kind of knew Michigan was going to win, but I also want to give a ton of credit to UConn. I did not think that this team was going to have much life in March Madness. I picked UCLA to upset them. I was extremely wrong. And you could argue, that they trailed to Duke for most of the game, but still, it showed a ton of resilience to come back and make plays when it matters most. Dan Hurley ain't going anywhere. UConn ain't going anywhere. They're going to reload much as they have. But I do think it's impressive because I would argue this is probably the worst team that Dan Hurley has taken to the national championship. Those two that he won back to back, those teams were loaded. I mean, they had, obviously Stephon Castle, Donovan Clingan. I mean, they had NBA talent all over the floor. I don't know if you necessarily have that here. What he got out of Terrace Reed, what he got out of Solo Ball, it was a really good squad for UConn and an excellent job by Dan Hurley. I think Michigan was just too good all around, just too well balanced. And even when Yaxel went down against Arizona, I was like, oh man, maybe Michigan will look a little vulnerable. Didn't matter. Everybody else stepped up. So yeah, it's one of the most dominant runs. Dusty May did a phenomenal job. And again, Michigan can beat you in any way that they prove that. It'll be interesting to see what else they do in the portal. I saw that they just got the center from Tennessee, another big dude. I assume he's going to take that Ade Mara role because I think Mara played himself into a lottery, easily a first round pick in this upcoming NBA draft. He likely played himself into the lottery. So, yeah, Michigan's going to reload.
And not only that, but yesterday Juke Harris from Wake Forest was visiting. He's now crystal balled to Michigan, so we'll expect to see more than likely both of those guys with the University of Michigan next season. Former Michigan player Justin Pippen, who was at Cal this past year, is now literally just now committed to Ohio State. Three schools in 3 years for Justin Pippen. We're not here to talk about Justin Pippen, but for Michigan, yeah, it was a very. I had thought to myself coming into that game, and a couple of friends of mine, I had said, like, if UConn can keep this game low scoring, they can slow the pace down, and they can play a half court style game. Not only will they be in the game against Michigan, but there's a good chance they could potentially come away with a victory against the Wolverines. And to their credit, they executed that nearly flawlessly in the first half. However, they went into the half down, despite Michigan not hitting a single three. It was really Michigan's ability to get to the free throw line, shooting 25 to 28, and being outshot from three, 9 threes to two, as they came away with the victory. But I think one of the biggest moments that changed the game, UConn was, I don't want to say in control in the first half because it was a 1, 2, 3 point game, but they were in front and they had been in front for a long period of time. And then Alex Caravan picks up that hook and hold foul. Michigan gets the free throw and the ball. And ever since that point, when Michigan then was able to score and take the lead, they pretty much never looked back. And I just wonder if that call wasn't made, what the first half would have ended up being. Because then you go into the locker room, it looks completely different for both teams. UConn obviously got into a really long drought offensively in the second half, and that allowed Michigan to pull away and get that lead up to 11, 13, so on and so forth. So I think UConn was fighting back, was incredible to watch, first off, that they got it down to two, down to four in the last few minutes, despite how poorly I think they played in the second half. I think a lot of that is credit to Michigan's physicality, and frankly, they were able to fluster guys like Braylon Mullins and Alex Caravan because Mullins did not shoot the ball well at all. He was 2 for 14 at one point, shot, I believe, 2 of 9 from three. So, two of the more important and vital pieces to UConn, if they wanted to beat Michigan, were those two guys, and they could not make shots. And ultimately, UConn falls. But I agree with you wholeheartedly on Dan Hurley and UConn. They're not going anywhere. If anything, they'll probably have an even better roster moving forward. One could argue. And I just was surprised that they even got to this point. And with the region that they were in, I think out of all those higher seeded teams, that was the one I would have picked the least likely to make it through the region just because stylistically how some of the matchups were against UConn. But despite that, they were able to prevail and somehow find a way to get back to the national championship. And with Michigan defeating UConn, that is the first time since 2009 the Huskies have lost in the Final Four or farther, meaning national championship. They have just two losses inside the Sweet 16 in the last 20 years, and those are both now to Big Ten teams. So I do think it is not a disservice to UConn that they lost this game. Like Dan Hurley mentioned it, we're not here at UConn we're not here to hang Final Four banners. We're here to hang national championship banners, and that's going to be the philosophy of the program moving forward. Man, their offense is fun to watch. The concepts, the designs, the constant ball movement. And I do think against Michigan, they got a little bit stagnant in that first half as well. They weren't moving as much as I am used to seeing them move offensively. And I think that helped Michigan defensively in that game. But also, the foul trouble UConn had really did not allow them at all to get into a rhythm on either side of the ball with their rotations, their lineups, their players, and it really is just truly a credit to Michigan and how dominant they were this entire season.
Yeah, and the funny thing is with UConn, they pretty much replicated the same game plan they had against Illinois, right? The Illinois was not ready for the physicality that UConn brought from both the defensive end. Illinois was just relying on Keith Wagler a ton. You could tell those last couple of minutes of the game. I mean, guys were huffing and puffing, hands on knees. Nobody else could really create. They would just get it to Keith Wagler and hope he could do something. But all those screens that they set on offense, the Illinois defense was running all over the court. It just wore them down. And you didn't see that same effect on Michigan. It seemed like Michigan was just better prepared for that physicality. I was pretty high on Illinois this year. I thought, again, Brad Underwood, this is probably one of the better teams that he's had, if not the best team that he's had. And I still think that, Illinois was a good team. Probably just a bad matchup in UConn. I personally thought Illinois was going to beat UConn, but UConn, the thing with them, their offense is just so replicable in March. I think a lot of people put a ton of stock, including myself, put a ton of stock into their Big East tournament performance and thought that, this team isn't going to do anything in March. Well, they are built for March. When they have a reliable source of offense in, their sets, so they rely on what they do, their movements, their sets, it works. It's good against anybody. It's not going to put up 90 to 100 points, like we can see Michigan do, but it's going to be effective, and it's going to wear teams down like you saw against Illinois. But again, another huge credit to Michigan being able to withstand that level of physicality because Terrace Reed was having a great tournament really up until the championship, and Michigan was just kind of ready for it. But Yeah, Terrace Reed was having a good tournament. He dominated from Furman all the way up until Illinois. He was kind of getting whatever he wanted down low, but then you run into somebody, a little bit more physical of his size, like Ade Mara, and it just wasn't as easy for him.
Yeah, and I think the size of Mara definitely impacted Terrace Reed's ability to be effective. Getting into the foul trouble did not help either. To clarify, like UConn had to rely on their bench a little bit more than I think they're accustomed to, but also more than Dan Hurley likely wanted to rely on his bench in that last game. Knowing how big Michigan is, though, it was inevitable they were going to get to the free throw line. It was just a matter of how much. And they were able to get to the line 28 times. They made five of those free throws. And when you're that efficient from there with those free opportunities at points, it's going to be immensely harder to get into a game or win a game as the opposing team. And UConn, frankly, just didn't shoot well enough from beyond the arc to stay in this game with Michigan. That's what it comes down to. Despite the fouls, despite the free throws, despite maybe how the first half looked, they were in the game, but they just couldn't hit shots down the stretch. And Michigan was, and they were able to pull away. So it is all credit to Michigan. We won't just be talking about the Wolverines, though, because we're going to now shuffle into the only other topic we're going to talk about. We're going to keep it short and sweet, but this will be a long conversation. So we're going to talk about the NBA anti-tanking provisions that have recently come out over the last few weeks, the ones that have been voted on, proposed, and some of the other stuff I've seen fans of the NBA propose as well regarding how to improve tanking. So I guess I just want to get your thoughts on tanking, the necessity of it or lack thereof, and also what the NBA has proposed and what your overall thoughts are on those provisions. Because I'm not a huge fan of any of them, but it seems like the league is going to move forward with one of those three options, and the one option that they're going to choose, I would argue, actually incentivizes tanking. It doesn't decentivize tanking.
Yeah, I mean, there's no issue that, or there's no secret that tanking is an issue. I mean, you're looking at some of these scores now towards the end of the year. I mean, I think the Jazz Pelicans, it was like 156 to 134 the other night. I'm like, dude, what? Those are All Star game numbers. And you had teams tanking before the All Star break. So it clearly is an issue here. But I think the lottery as a whole, I understand the lottery is in place to give teams a chance at a higher pick, whereas you see it in the NFL. Because I'm against the lottery. I think it's dumb. I think it makes no sense because you see teams like the Jazz kind of get screwed over where they're continually at the bottom of the league, but they never get a number one overall pick, right? Because they're bad, but they don't have a chance to get the best player in the draft in order to make themselves better. Try to speed up that turnaround. So I get that the lottery is in place so to decentivize tanking so that you're not, oh, I'm going to lose as many games as possible so that I can guarantee myself the highest pick possible. Well, no. But when you've got play-in teams getting the number one pick, okay, this is clearly a flawed system. So from the proposed rule changes, it seems like they're going to increase the lottery to what, like 18 teams. I think that they're going in the complete wrong direction. I think they need to get rid of the lottery. To be honest, the idea to get rid of the draft, I know this would probably never happen, but I wasn't really a big fan of that at first. But I think the more that I think about it, I think that does make the most sense, and we can get into that here in a little bit. But yeah, I'm not really a fan of any of these proposed ideas. I think increasing the lottery just doesn't really make much sense because you're giving more teams a chance at the number one pick. That's not what we need. We need these teams at the bottom of the league to have a chance to get guys like AJ DeBance, to get guys like Darren Peterson, guys they believe can help speed up their turnaround and they can build around quickly. And that's just not at all what we're getting.
I think the NBA loves to contradict itself. When supermax contracts initially became a thing, the reason why they were initiated and why they were created was to keep homegrown talent in those small markets, to keep them in those places, to keep those teams stable, to make them competitive. So the league wasn't just the big markets against everybody else. But in saying that, they've also diminished the value in, I don't want to say the value in being bad, but the value in deconstructing your roster and building it from the ground up. I don't think Like the blatant tanking is an issue. Like the other night, the Kings intentionally fouled Steph Curry while being up in the game by one. He then went to the line, made the free throws. Kings ended up losing by five, but the NBA investigated it and said, "Oh, there was a mistake made by Doug Christie." Obviously, it's a mistake. We can talk about if it was intentional or not. It's not really the point, but I do think when teams are bad and teams that are just like rightfully bad, they're not just choosing to be bad. The teams that just don't have the necessary parts to be a competitive team, I don't think we should punish those teams because they're just genuinely a bad roster and like they need that help in the lottery. That's different from hey, the Bucks or hey, the whoever. Let's just intentionally rest some of these guys. End of the year, we're gonna tank and diminish our value best that we can to help our lottery odds. I just think they need to find a middle ground between that, because reality is teams like the Wizards and Jazz have been stuck in the lottery for years. And the reason they can't get out of the lottery is because they have zero lottery success. They have not had any, they will continue to not have any, and that's just the reality. But the biggest flaw in the system is that ever since Adam Silver restructured the lottery odds several years ago, no team that has actually had the worst record in the league has gotten the number one pick. And he would argue that's the point of it. But I would argue that's actually defeating the point because now you're giving more teams the opportunity to get away with being bad or tanking and having a genuine chance at the number one pick. So if they want to decentivize the tanking or limit it to maybe two, three, four teams, either shrink the lottery or you convert the odds again, which is something that it used to be 25% to the worst team in the league. And then it went down from there. And I would argue at that point in time, it wasn't necessarily that big of an issue. Now it's the top four worst teams. Those four teams have equal odds. So I think that just opens the door for more teams to choose to be bad because what the incentive is the number one pick. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Um, I'm trying to find the lottery odds that were proposed. So in the board of governors meeting that they held, or they will be holding on May 28th about anti-tanking. Option one is the one that has gained the most traction. I'm not even going to talk about option two or three because they aren't really relevant right now. But option one was what you said: 18 teams in the lottery, the bottom 10 that missed the play-in, and the 8 play-in teams. That is who is eligible for this. We kind of just saw this with Cooper Flag and that whole debacle with the Mavs just a year or so ago with how they were able to finesse the system by trading Luka and then getting Cooper Flag. Not really the point, but the bottom 10 teams all would have an 8% chance of moving up in the lottery. So I think they're looking at it backwards because frankly, that just means more teams are going to be willing to be bad because they have the same chance at the number one pick as the worst team in the league. And the other 8 teams would split the remaining 20% of odds moving up. All 18 spots would be part of the lottery, and this isn't even factoring in when we do get 2 expansion teams, more than likely, being Seattle and Las Vegas. Now the lottery will be 20 teams because you have to go to the bottom 12 and the 8 that missed the plan. So I just think they're looking at it wrong. Shrink it and go from there. Don't include the play-in teams either. I think the beauty of the play-in is that those teams that maybe were iffy on. I'll give a good example, like the Hornets this year. Not a great start to the year, but they have been one of the best teams in basketball by statistically, by win-loss, all of it in the last 2 months. They're a team that has caught so much fire that now they're in this play-in. They're above 500. They're about 6 or 7 games over 500 actually, and this play-in has given them the chance to be the 7, 8, 9, or 10 seed, but still have a chance at the playoffs with how well they've been playing. I think that makes total sense. If you look at it on the flip side, you get teams that in the past, like the Bulls and the Hawks and the Heat, who are very, very content with being stuck in the middle. And I think one way we could kind of change the narrative on the plan and what it's there for is if the plan is optional, it's not mandatory. So, for example, maybe teams 9 and 10 one year are within 5 games, or they're within 4 games of the 7 seed and the 8 seed. In years when that is applicable, the play in is initiated. That way, teams 9 and 10 have a chance to get in. However, in other years when the 9 seed or the 10 seed is 6, 7, 8, 9 games back from the 7 seed or the 8 seed, the plan is nullified. It does not go into effect. Those teams are going to be part of the lottery, and we go from there. Now the conversation would be: are we going to include it for one conference and not the other? I think that's reasonable, but I think they need to learn how to use the plan to force teams to pick a direction. Are you going to rebuild? Are you going to try to contend? Are you going to try to compete? Which one isn't going to be? We're not going to have these teams floating in this middle ground area, in this middle area for too long, because I think it's ineffective in that state. And I think with some of the proposals that they have given, there's going to be more teams willing to be content with the plan because, hey, maybe we'll make the playoffs. Hey, maybe we won't make the playoffs, but it's fine because we're still going to be in the lottery. I don't think we should be rewarding teams for not being good enough to compete for a championship, but also not being bad enough to justifiably get a top pick in the lottery. I think those teams stuck in the middle need to be forced to choose a direction, and that also might help tanking. It might not. But I think you help tanking by shrinking the lottery or reverting back to the old lottery percentages, which was 25% for the first pick, and then you allocate the rest of the percentage from the remaining teams. But I think by making it fair game for everybody, same percentage, it's actually going to make more teams choose to be bad. That's just my opinion. I don't know if I'm looking at it wrong. I think that's just what would happen.
No, I really like your point about forcing teams to kind of pick a direction. Like I look at the Warriors right now, sitting at 37 and 43. I mean, obviously they're not going to rebuild while they still have Steph on their team. But like, let's be honest, like the Warriors are pretty bad. I mean, they just lost to the Lakers last night at home. Like I, but the Warriors are kind of stuck in that middle ground, right? Like they're 6 games under 500. They're clearly, not bad enough to really commit to a rebuild, but and they're good enough to get into the play-in. And I honestly I like that the play-in is 10 teams. I do think if we can get more teams to try and compete to the playoffs. Now some of these 10 seeds, like should the Heat have really ever made the playoffs last year against the Cavs? I mean that was kind of a waste of a series. I could argue the same thing could happen to Golden State. Like if Golden State wins his play-in, gets into the 8 seed, they're probably going to get mopped by Oklahoma City. But these teams should not, by any means, have a chance at the number one overall pick. Like the Mavericks probably shouldn't have had a chance at the number one overall pick last year. The Hawks 2 years ago probably should not have had a chance at the number one overall pick. So I think I like the idea of shrinking the lottery. I think that's definitely a way to go about it. Like I just looking at these teams at the bottom, like the teams that should have a chance at the number one pick, right? The Jazz, the Kings, Washington, Indiana, even Brooklyn. I mean, all these teams have 21 wins or less. Like those are the true bottom of the league teams. Now, look, there's no guarantee that getting the number one overall pick is going to turn you around. You still have to hit on that pick, right? The Sixers drafted Markelle Fultz. It didn't work out. But then you take a look at, teams like the Celtics. They get Tatum and Jaylen Brown. They hit on both of those picks. They're able to turn their franchise around. So obviously you have to hit on the pick, but still, the point is, you can get that getting that number one overall pick severely increases your chances of being able to turn your franchise around. So we'll have to see how it shakes out here, but yeah, 18 teams having a chance at the number one overall pick like that. I don't know how that makes any sort of sense. I like that the NBA wants to try and make the lottery work. I don't really think there's a way to do it right now in this climate of the NBA. I just don't really think there's a way to do it. I think if you're going to keep the draft around, I think you just have to get rid of the lottery and you have to commit to it like the NFL. You just keep it, numerical. Worst record's number one. Second worst record is number two. Now, I brought this up to a couple of my buddies a few months ago, and they said that's going to make tanking even worse. They said teams are really going to go all out for the number one overall pick, but I would argue that tanking can't really get any worse. If you really think tanking is that big of an issue, I mean, like I said, we had teams doing it before the All-Star break even happened. So it just makes the league unwatchable. I mean, that's a whole different discussion, but Yeah, I think I would have to agree with you. Shrinking the lottery is the best way to go. I like that they're proposing ideas. They want to make it work. I will say that is one thing about Adam Silver. I know a lot of people, give him a lot of flack. He takes a lot of criticism, a lot of heat, but he has continued to try things. He has continued to try and make things work. Kind of like the NFL. Roger Goodell continues to try and make things work. The difference is Roger Goodell, I would say a lot of his changes actually do work, and he's actually been successful in a lot of his changes. You don't see the MLB really change a lot of things. The MLB is kind of stagnant in the way they do things. Now, granted, I think they have a pretty good product. There really isn't a ton to change, but yeah, I think this could be a pretty big change coming. I'll be interested to see what they do with it. But yeah, I think I would agree. These playing teams absolutely should not have a chance at the number one overall pick.
And one other thing to add with the whole point that you made about the number one pick isn't going to guarantee that you're all of a sudden a contending team or you're going to compete. What it does do, though, is actually make sense because, as I mentioned earlier, the whole Supermax thing, like that was put in place to keep top stars or elite level players, to keep all of them from literally choosing to leave and go to all the big markets. It was meant to keep a lot of those players in those small markets. So by rewarding, I don't want to say rewarding, but like by properly providing those small market teams with the number one pick, the number two pick, the number three pick. Those guys can develop in those places. They can become elite level players in those places, and then you can use the supermax that was created for this exact reason to keep those guys in those places rather than they leave and go to New York or something like that. The exact example would be when we see the Zion Williamsons and the John Morants, and when those guys were in the draft going to small market teams, that Supermax being in place has, in a lot of ways, kept guys like Ja or Zion in smaller markets rather than them hitchhiking and catching a drive over to a big market team. So I think what they want to do is have a more competitive environment, which I would argue they actually do have because we haven't had a back to back NBA champion for a very long time now. This is the longest stretch in NBA history without a repeat champion, or with this amount of champions in that much time. So, in a lot of ways, I would say it's a little bit more competitive. I would argue the top of the line portion of the league is a little bit deeper. We have some smaller markets that are improving. Teams like the Cavs, the Hornets are starting to make some noise because they have a very good core of young players. Some of the teams out in the Western Conference aren't exactly big market teams, but they have high level talent. Teams like Minnesota, Denver, like those aren't, you don't think of those as big markets or top markets. However, they have sustained success through the talent that they have on their teams, and they've kept their players there using the supermax or using whatever extensions that they can. So I do think that it should be shrunk, and if you're not going to shrink it, then tweak the odds in a way to where only in some unforeseen, like 1 in 1 million odds type of chance, does a team from the play-in or the bottom portion of the lottery move up, and they're able to get one of the better picks. Indiana's a weird example because they were just in the finals, their best players hurt, and they're now all of a sudden terrible. And people are going to argue they tanked intentionally. They did not tank intentionally to start the year. It wasn't until about January when they kind of put the nail in the coffin on the year because the reality is apparently they're not a very good team without Tyrese Halliburton. I just think for some of those teams, like a year like this for Indiana, for example, they have a cheaper ownership group. They chose not to re-sign Miles Turner. They want to remain under the luxury tax. So very conveniently, their player happened to get hurt. Their best player happened to get hurt in the finals last year, and they were able to finesse their way into the lottery. But that is a lot different than a team like Milwaukee, who was trying to go for the play-in until about, I don't know, a couple weeks, a month ago, has intentionally sat Giannis to worsen their, like, to better their odds but worsen their chances at the playoffs. So they got to find a way to like meet in the middle on that, because they want to keep teams like the Jazz and the Grizzlies and whoever else from tanking. But I would argue those teams not tanking, which is the blatant resting of all your players and stuff, them not tanking, they're gonna win maybe 3 or 4 more games, maybe five. Like that's not a good team. Like that's kind of my point with it is like unfortunately the reality is for basketball especially, it's a little bit different from some of the other sports because baseball doesn't have a salary cap. Football has a much bigger roster and a lot more money to allocate across a lot of different people. But for basketball, frankly, the way I believe it, like rebuilding is kind of a necessary form of roster building. You have to be bad at some point and retool your team or blow your team up to get back up to that point where you maybe once were. Whether that's contention, whether that's you know competing at a high level but maybe not being a true contender, whatever it may be, that's the reality. And we've seen teams who haven't had any lottery success for numbers of years be stuck in the bottom half or bottom third of the league because they haven't been rewarded with lottery success. The Kings are a prime example of this because they have been stuck in NBA purgatory for essentially 20 years, and in large part it's because they've never really had one of the top picks in the draft, and the one or two times they did, they picked the wrong guy definitively in those moments, and that's burned them. But teams like the Wizards and the Kings that have just always been gifted the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, or ninth lottery pick, when reality is those are the teams that need the first pick, the second pick, the third pick. That would catapult those teams into maybe getting out of the lottery in future years. So I just think they need to find a way to not penalize truly bad teams, but penalize the teams who are trying to be bad so they can get a lottery pick. And unfortunately, the reality is next year's draft class isn't nearly as elite as this one. So they're going to put some provision in. Let's say it's the 18 team one that they're proposing. They're going to put a provision in. They're going to see tanking go down, and they're going to think they go hand in hand. When reality is teams teams know which draft classes are a little bit more elite than the others. They're going to selectively tank or choose to be bad in the years that they want to be bad because they understand who's in that draft class. Like, I don't blame, I personally don't blame some of these teams for tanking to try to get Darren Peterson or AJ DeVance or whoever the case may be. Like, I would probably, if I had a bad team and I knew I wasn't competing for the playoffs, I'd probably do the same thing. I'm maybe not as egregiously, but I would definitely have my eyes on the draft and not have my eyes on the playoffs and competing. So that's kind of like how I feel about it. And even if the NBA gets these teams to be competitors and potentially a 40 plus win team, there's no guarantee they're going to remain there because free agency is still a thing and players get to dictate where they want to go. And who says they want to go play in New Orleans or Charlotte or Memphis or whatever small market? There is no guarantee of that. So some of these teams have to have the draft in order to sustain a level of success. The Warriors are a prime example of this because they drafted Draymond Green, they drafted Klay Thompson, they drafted Stephen Curry, and they built those guys up. They were able to keep them extended every single time that contract talk came talking, and they've been with the franchise. Most of them, at least Clay's obviously moved on, but like Draymond and Steph have remained with the Warriors, and for a large part of this time that they've been on the Warriors, they've been not only dominant but competitive and trying to win championships because the Warriors were able to keep those guys in Golden State. So I think they shouldn't go overboard with it. I think once they started playing with it a lot anyway, I think they started doing too much, and that's where we're at right now. The perfect example is the plan because Adam Silver put it in place to incentivize more teams to chase the playoffs. But the reality is, some of those teams have become very lackadaisical with their offseason moves because they know that they're at least a play-in team. So those are those teams like the Heat and the Hawks and the Bulls that we were talking about. Totally fine with being in the plan because they know they have a chance to be the eighth seed and lose in the first round, and you can call it a successful season. Like I just think those teams need to be forced to choose to be a competitive team or choose to be a team trying to rebuild. That's just personally how I feel. And however they go about tweaking it is however they go about doing it. But moving forward, frankly, I don't think tanking is ever going to not exist. It's just the reality. But we don't have we don't have teams like the Charlotte Bobcats that won like 6 or 7 games and they're just bad. Like it's not what it is anymore because there's an increased talent pool in the NBA today than what there was even on that Bobcats team. There's just a lot more talent across every roster, which is why I think expansion is a great idea. But I would argue we need to add not 2 expansion teams, but 4 expansion teams because then you can conference realign Minnesota and Memphis to the Eastern Conference, for example, or however that might work out. But then you also can better spread the wealth of talent across the league. You can way more easily just spread that across a bunch of other teams who will more than likely have a ton of cap space, and those can be the teams that try to go chase guys in free agency because they have the money to. So I think there's a lot of things they could do that they aren't doing. But like you said, credit to Adam Silver because he is trying. Like I would rather him try and throw things out there like he has with the All-Star weekend than just sit back and let it be bad. That is completely just I think that's unacceptable as a commissioner. Your job is to continue the advancement, the evolution, the overall revenue generation of the league, and he's tried to do that. So I'm not gonna fault him for continuously doing things. Like you said, he catches a lot of flack, but I think some of it's a little bit unwarranted. Some of it is definitely warranted, but it's hard to say. So the thing with Roger Goodell in the NFL is the owners are always almost all of them universally aligned on certain things, and the commissioner just has to see those things through. He has to put those things pen to paper. He is in full alignment with the owners most of the time. For the NBA, although it is similar, I do think it's just different because in the NBA, it's similar to the MLB. You have a lot of owners who have a little bit more willingness to be cheap or, get their bargain, whatever the case may be. They want to generate the revenue. They want to treat it like an actual business. They forget about the winning games part of it, just like how it is in the MLB. Whereas in the NFL, I would argue almost all of those teams there's not owners selectively choosing to be cheap, or at least in some cases, I think it's harder to do that in the NFL. And obviously, their contracts aren't always fully guaranteed and stuff, but I just think the NBA is a little bit more on the MLB side of it than they are the NFL side of it. And maybe if they can rework their minds to put that into reality, they'll better understand how to pivot in these situations. Because the last thing the NBA needs is a lockout like the MLB is doomed to have in 2027. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on everything.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if the NBA got that far into a lockout like we had in 2011. I highly doubt we're going to get that far. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be change coming. I'm not exactly sure, what it's going to be. But it does look like the lottery is going to stay. Although I will maintain the position that I think they should just get rid of it. I don't think it's ever really made a ton of sense. I mean, we're determining draft picks based on ping pong balls at the end of the day, and odds that nobody really truly knows how accurate they are. It just doesn't make a ton of sense in my opinion. No other league, really does it like that, and it just it can be effective. It hasn't been effective as of late, and maybe these past couple of years are just outliers. So maybe there is a better way to do it. But ultimately, again, like I said, there's going to be change, and we'll see if it's effective.
And with that, I think we kind of spilled our 2 cents on it. No need to repeat. That's gonna just we're gonna end it right there. About 40 minutes for this episode because and rather than throwing a bunch of topics at everybody, we're going to split things up the next few weeks. We've already planned this out. Next week, perfectly, this works out beautifully because we've just talked about the NBA, but we have not talked about the play-in, playoff preview, any of that, and we're gonna start to get some of that next week. So we're gonna hopefully early in the week do an episode. We're gonna preview the NBA playoffs. It's probably talk about the plan as well, um, but previewing that might do some brackets as well for that. See how we see things playing out. But other than that, the following week we'll then preview the NFL draft and we'll talk about some team needs, what various teams might do. We might focus on the Eagles and Browns as well because those are our teams, but I would like to expand that out to the entire league. As Same can be said for the NBA. Your team is going to be in the playoffs. The Kings are going to be fighting for the number one pick. So I'm not mad that they've been tanking, to be honest. I don't care. Like, they need something to rejuvenate basketball in Sacramento. So I don't care. But that's what the next few weeks looks like. We'll get this posted sometime. This is Friday, for those who don't know. But when you see this, it'll be posted between Friday and Sunday, and you guys will get it. And then we'll come back next week for what will be more NBA talk. We didn't do it today, but we'll also talk about the MLB season so far, what has stood out, the demise of the Detroit Tigers being worse than the White Sox, the Rockies, the entire league right now. I'm in a flux about it. We have an amazing Rookie of the Year race going on right now in the AL, specifically between several AL Central players, actually. So we'll talk about that moving forward as well. But that'll conclude episode 26 of Beyond the Box Score. Trayvon Hastings, Joey Korzanowski here. I want to thank everybody for listening or watching on whatever platform they may be doing it from. Like, subscribe, share, comment, whatever it is you do on that platform. We appreciate the support, as always, as well. Interact with our stuff because we will try to interact back. We've started to do that a little bit more, especially with the constant bickering of March Madness that tends to happen. But with that, that'll be all. Thank you guys for watching or listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.